and she will lead the program. Mary, please join us. While Mary is joining us, I want to note to you to please put your questions and comments in the chat. We want to answer your questions at a point in the program, but we need to hear from you, so post them in the comments section. Mary, welcome aboard.
Good afternoon, Brenda. It's good to see you today.
Good afternoon. I'm going to turn it over to you, and we are going to roll right through so we can make sure we have time for questions.
Well, we're in for another exciting, excellent presenter today. I want to share a little bit about our presenter, Orice Jenkins, who is an educator, an author, a recording artist, a genealogy researcher, and a phenomenal storyteller. He's from Hartford, Connecticut. Orice is a member of the Sons and Daughters of the U.S. Middle Passage and the Afro-American Historical and Genealogical Society. He's been featured on podcasts and radio shows such as Research at the National Archives and Beyond, Genealogy Adventures, and Grading the Nutmeg. He also presented nationally at Roots Tech and internationally at the Legacy Family Tree webinar series, among many other presentations. Orice has worked as a consultant with Dr. Matt Baker, the creator of usefulcharts.com, collaborating on genealogical videos that have garnered millions of views on YouTube. In 2022, Orice contributed to Bernice Bennett's latest book, Black Homesteaders of the South, and appeared with other homesteader descendants at the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture during the Black History Month 2023 in Washington, D.C. Orice is also the author of Chester's Children, a genealogy blog that explores his deep roots as a descendant of enslaved Americans. He currently serves as the executive director of Musica Franklin, a youth music program in Greenfield, Massachusetts. On a personal note, as contributors to the Black Homesteaders of the South publication, Orice and I discovered that we had common ancestors that homestead in Geneva and Coffee Counties, Alabama. Not only did I gain the best research partner ever, we also discovered that we are family. It is my pleasure and with great pride that I introduce to you Orice Jenkins. Orice?
Hi. That
Hi.
was so sweet of an introduction.
So good
Yes,
to see you today. And I know that you have so much to share. So, Orice, take it away.
I will take it away. And thank you, Dr. Clark, who is a phenomenal AARP volunteer who goes all across the country, trying to help other people and share information with other people. So we appreciate you, Dr. Clark, and thank you for inviting us. And Dr. Shelley Murphy is also my cousin, and Bernice Bennett's also my cousin. So I feel like it's a family affair here that we've all found each other in the past several years. So it's been a great series. So as soon as I see my presentation, here we go. Perfect. So today's topic is researching your ancestry for adoptees. Okay. And I'm going to go ahead and get started. So the first thing I want to say is that this presentation is not just for adoptees. Okay. More than just adoption applies to what I'm going to share with you. Several circumstances can contribute to a person being unfamiliar with their biological heritage. And that's the main issue that arises when you're adopted. So, of course, adoption is one of the main causes of this, but also something called an NPE, a non-paternity event, which is also quite common when you realize that, well, I'll use one of the phrases that I got from Nika Smith that comes from the movie The Color Purple, where they realize that Pa is not Pa, and that becomes kind of the seminal moment in the movie or in the book, because Celia's able to inherit from her biological father. So you have that Pa not Pa moment. It happens very often. It's happened in almost every family I've researched, that you realize that who you think is the father, the expected parent, is not who's actually the parent. Slavery and other racial violence can also contribute to not being aware of who you're related to biologically. And that's because during slavery, of course, people were sold away from their families. And the same thing, well, not the same thing, but during, say, race massacres or something like that, where people had to escape and change their names. And they might have even made up their own fictional family history that their descendants believed. And then you take a DNA test and you find out there's a lot of other things going on. Of course, witness protection, very similar thing. You get a new identity, you go away, and your children don't know about who you were before that. So, and also fertility treatments. There's a fertility treatment that can result in having a completely different DNA than what you expected. And if you listen to someone like Kerry Washington, the actress, she just went through that in her own family history and realized that her biological father is not the man that raised her because of a fertility treatment that her mother underwent. So all of those difficult cases can be dealt with using what I'm going to show you today. So the first thing I want to share with you is that DNA is a record. Okay. So you've been hearing a lot about records throughout this series, census records and homestead land entry case files. DNA is a record too. So you may not have access to any of those things. Like when I started, I couldn't find any census records for my family, any records at all. But there was one record that I always had with me. Even if you know nothing about your biological heritage, you will always carry with you a record of who your ancestors were. And it's called deoxyribonucleic acid. But of course, we shorten that all the time to just say it's DNA. DNA is a record. And matches between your DNA and another person's DNA is evidence to a familial connection. So that's what we're looking for, is these matches where you and another person connect and have the same segments of DNA. So I think everyone knows by now, there's all these commercials, there's a lot of different DNA platforms. So that's the number one question I always get. What's the best platform to test? And I'm going to give you my advice right now. My advice you don't have to follow, but here's what I think, considering also how costly genealogy is. I suggest starting with an Ancestry DNA test. You want to wait until a holiday for the best discounts. And that's saying that even though at full price, Ancestry is more economical than pretty much all the other reputable tests. But during holidays, you might find it's half off. And even lately, they've been going to 70% off, which when that time comes, I'm just like, oh, click, buy, and see how many I can get before I've exceeded my genealogy budget for that month. Which, yes, I do have to put myself on a budget sometimes because it's really something I'm excited about. And Ancestry is not only the most economical, but it's also the most effective test, in my opinion, because they actually have family trees on Ancestry. So the people that you match, in theory, will already have a tree of who they're connected to, that you can see directly from that match. I say in theory because you don't have to put up a tree. So some matches don't, and you have to be prepared for that as well. But even if those matches don't have trees, there are records you can access on Ancestry if you get a subscription. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. So you can also try 23andMe. 23andMe has been going through a lot recently, but it's still, I would say, one of the second best option to try testing. And there are people that you will match on 23andMe who did not show up on Ancestry DNA. So if you have the funds and you're willing to accept the risks of, using 23andMe right now, I definitely suggest trying it because there are additional matches there. And then it's also very important to mention that other sites will accept DNA uploads from Ancestry or 23andMe. So that means you can download your actual raw DNA file from Ancestry or 23andMe, and then you can upload that to these other sites, often for free. And then you will also have access to people that took those tests, specifically with MyHeritage and Family Tree DNA. They have their own tests. So if you upload your Ancestry kit there, you will see the people that match you on those websites too. GEDmatch does not have its own test, but you can still upload there. Anybody can upload to GEDmatch from any of these sites. So you will get a good mix of people from different sites, not just the place that you tested. So, and again, that's mostly free. So I definitely suggest doing that as well to maximize the people that you match. So now we're going to go over some of the resources you will need when you finally have taken your test and you get some matches. This is the first one I want to show you. It's called the Shared Centimorgan Project. And I should explain a centimorgan real quick. Centimorgan it's not a centimeter. If it was two lowercase letters, CM, it would be centimeter. But with the uppercase M, centimorgan is actually a unit that we measure DNA with when it's specifically referring to family. So we'll talk about that a little bit later, but the Shared Centimorgan Project is great. You see this awesome chart there that kind of shows you what amount of DNA you should expect for certain relationships. So you can look at that. And that's important because the amount of DNA shared with a match can narrow down the relationships that are possible. Okay, so we'll talk about that a little bit later, and I'll show you some examples, but it's very important to note how many centimorgans or how many what percentage. Some websites have percentage instead of centimorgans, and you can also put percentage into this website and convert that. Okay, let me go to the next slide now. I suggest getting a free account on Family Search, and I say free account, but all the accounts are free. Family Search is a totally free website that is run by the LDS Church in Utah, and it's wonderful. So if you don't want to get an Ancestry paid subscription, definitely go on Family Search. Either way, you should get both. And this is really important because you're going to need to research the families of your DNA matches. And of course, Ancestry, where you may have already tested, you should also get a subscription on Ancestry if you can afford to do so. It is worth it. They have, I don't know how many billions of records, but they have so many records from every state, from many countries. If you want to research outside of the US, you have to get a World Explorer membership. And then they have the All Access Family Plan as well. And that plan is great because you also get access to newspapers, which is another really great way to research your family. So one other thing I wanted to mention that I can't really provide you a link to, but a lot of adoption agencies or state agencies will provide you with adoption non-identifying information. And this is actually a screenshot of my cousin's information. You can't see her name, but I will shout her out. Her name is Leslie, and she is from the 313, Detroit, Michigan. So I want to give her a shout out. But you might be able to access this information by writing a letter to your state. And the people I've helped are not just from Michigan, but I've helped people from Florida, from Connecticut, from various places in the country. And every state that I've helped people in, there has been some sort of information like this. And it might come as a pre-printed form like this, or just a straight letter where it'll come back to you. So make sure to inquire with your state about this information. So let's get to the DNA. What do you do with your DNA results? So first, you will receive, this is from Ancestry, by the way, you will receive a list of people who are genetically related to you. And this is a list that comes from one of my cousins, and I have blocked out the names for privacy purposes, but this is basically what it will look like. And some of those circles will have photographs in them, possibly of who, what the people look like. So there's a few things that I want to point out to you, because Ancestry presents this in a way that I think is a little bit confusing. So I'm going to just walk you through a little bit. First of all, they will predict a relationship. So you see the first one says half sister or niece, which, by the way, those are very different things. So just, that alone shows you, what to watch out for. If you only see half sister and you think that's your half sister, but it's really your niece, that can cause some concern. And people have come to me with that, thinking that they have a half sister and it's actually their niece. They only saw half sister. Another thing they'll do is they'll give you a range and they'll say, oh, second to third cousin. Well, a second cousin and a third cousin are very different things. Okay. So just be aware that what you see in that prediction is not actually how you're related to that person. Usually. Sometimes it is correct, but usually, it's difficult to know that information just from a DNA test. You have to look at more evidence before you can make a determination. You can actually click on the little prediction. It's got a blue link in it here. And if you click on it, it will actually pop up some of the statistics for how they came to that conclusion. And you realize that they factored in self-reported ages to come up with half sister or niece. But if you look down here, there are 3 other options that have an 89% frequency at this DNA relationship. So it's not just niece and half sister, but granddaughter, aunt, and grandmother. And I want to point that out because, yes, they factored in ages, which does matter, but also I know situations where, well, I'll use my own family. My brother was born in 1973 and my sister was born in 1998. So what would you assume if those 2 people took a DNA test? Or even if my brother has grandchildren? And again, my sister is only in her 20s. So, if my brother's grandchildren tested, what assumptions would be made about how my sister could be related to them? And you have to realize that in certain families, and not just Black families, but all kinds of families where there's a lot of kids, might be 15 kids in a family. And so there are large age ranges between siblings. And I know some cases where I know some people that are older than their own aunt. So you have to be really considerate of those options, because I do find that they are more common in Black families. So just be aware of that, it might say half sister, but it could really be your granddaughter, I've seen that happen too. So just be aware, click on them to view the other possibilities. So again, make note of how many centimorgans you share with your close matches. Larger numbers are evidence of a closer relationship, okay? So I put some examples on the right. 3,500 is pretty much going to be a parent or a child. Now, funny enough, if you took 2 Ancestry DNA tests, you would also match yourself at 35 centimorgans, which this might be a little too much to share, because if you're just starting, this is a lot. But, basically you inherit, part of your chromosome, your chromosome pairs. So you get half from your mom and half from your dad. And you're really only testing half matches. So that's why if you test yourself, again, you'll match yourself 35 centimorgans like a parent-child relationship. But usually you wouldn't do that. So Other than that, 3,500 centimorgans is going to be your parent or your child, or an identical twin, which again, that's getting into a little bit more complicated than I plan to go into for this particular presentation, but just wanted to say it just in case it comes up for anybody. And I have dealt with adoptees who have twins and didn't know it. So I just want to mention everything. Usually 2,500 centimorgans thereabouts is going to be your full sibling where you share mother and father. So this first match here that I have circled in red on the screenshot, that's 1,997 centimorgans, which for these purposes, I'm just going to round up and say it's 2,000 centimorgans. That's a lot, okay? If you see comparatively to a full sibling being 2,500, 2,000 is a whole lot, okay? So I'm going to the shared centimorgan project, which I told you about earlier, and I showed you the chart that they have, but they also have a platform where you can put in the number of your match, the centimorgan shared, and you can actually get similar to what I just showed you on Ancestry, but I personally find this tool to be a little bit more accurate. That doesn't mean that it is, but in my opinion, this is better because it uses real data provided by genealogists from across the various sites, not just Ancestry, but all the different sites. And when I say genealogists, I mean including me. My data has been placed into this tool many years ago, and it's created by Blaine Bettinger, who's a genealogist that specializes in DNA. And it's also hosted by another genealogist named Johnny Pearl, who's created this great website, DNA Painter, which you all should have the link for. But anyway, DNA Painter generally has very advanced tools on it, but this tool anybody can use. All you got to do is go to it, type in that number, and then you get down here. And remember, it was 80-something% on Ancestry, but on here, it's 99% of the time that this data was put into this platform. You know, a match like this, 99% of the time was one of these options. So a full sibling is very unlikely, under 2,000 centimorgans. But Ancestry said it was a lot more likely. So just, look at both of these to try to get, you want to focus your research on what you're looking at. So I want to be honest with you, getting a 2,000 centimorgan match is very rare. This is probably the only person whose test I've looked at and seen something like that, except for people who already have tested their half siblings. But for you to be adopted, to take a test and find a half sibling immediately, it's possible, of course, but to be more realistic, I want to tell you what to do when it's not that easy. Because of course, if you have a half sibling, you can confirm that it's a half sibling. You know who at least one of your parents are, unless that person's adopted too. But usually you'll get much lower matches, okay? With lower matches, that means that there's way more possibilities for how you could be related to these people. And that's what makes it difficult. So you see here, I have a 237 centimorgan, 236, 227, 224. That's usually what you'll get. And even that is lucky. I mean, some people, they don't have anything. Like when I first tested my mom, she didn't have anybody closer than 100 centimorgans. So you have to review the family trees of the highest matches you have to narrow down how you could be related to them. They may have an incomplete tree. They might have no tree at all. And you can see that in the circle here, just in this one screenshot, you see somebody with a public tree, which is great. That's what you hope for. But there's only 6 people in it. Now, that could be a good thing if it's somebody, say, older than me, whose parents might be deceased already, and therefore you can, you can figure out who their parents are. If it's somebody younger than me and they only have 6 people in their tree, well, you may not be able to see anybody in their tree because they all might be alive. And Ancestry hides living people in the public trees. Now, they might have an unlinked tree, like you see in the middle of the circle. That means they still have a tree, they just have not linked it to their DNA. So you have to click through a couple of times, but you can still see their tree, usually. And they might even have thousands of people in their tree, even though it's unlinked. And then, of course, like I said, that you can see at the bottom of the circle, they might have no tree at all. And with all these cases that you see here, you would have to build out their tree. Some people automatically will reach out to the matches and ask them, who are your people? Where do you come from? I usually do not do that. To me, that's a waste of time. And people often do not respond, especially if they don't have any trees. They're usually not checking their test, and they might have only tested because they wanted to know what countries they come from. And that's all they checked it for and never opened it again. So usually I will try to build out their family tree before I try to reach out to them. You also want to take note of the parent assigned to each match. So this is telling you what side of your family that match comes up on. Okay. Now it's only saying parent 1 or parent 2. And you see actually all of these matches on the screen are all parent 1 matches. These labels may not be 100% accurate, but generally they are correct. And you will be able to manually label each side. If you figure out which is paternal and which is maternal, you are able to label that. So using 237 centimorgans as a jumping off point, we're going to go back to the shared CM project. And here you can see all the different options that come up. You see on the right on that chart, what's grayed out is not possible, but you see there's a lot of stuff that is possible that, is in the colorful boxes. And on the left, you can possibly see the list of all those different percentages and different options within the percentages. It gets a lot more difficult, but it's still narrowing it down. Especially 237, you see there's nothing further than a second cousin twice removed. Okay. So that means that a third cousin is not possible. Actually, it is in the 1% with a little cross by it. And the cross by it means it's not possible. So, it'd be very, very rare and pretty much impossible for you to have a third cousin match at 237 centimorgans. So that means a third cousin means you share great-great-grandparents. So this means that your match, no matter what, is going to be related to you closer than great-great-grandparents, okay? Which means you might share a great-grandparent with this person. So I'm going to show you a brief case study example. This is from my own personal research. And I'm going to kind of explain to you how this happened. This is kind of a best case scenario, but it also shows you a worst case scenario within it. So we're going to go through this and then I'll be able to take your questions. So I received a message on Ancestry. You see the date there, July 30th, 2020. I'll never forget this day. And this is a match I had seen for a while, but didn't know who she was. And, she basically sent a very nice message and told me in her message that she was adopted. So that's very helpful because sometimes people don't even say that they're adopted on their Ancestry profile. And I'm reaching out to them for more information. And then they're like, well, I'm adopted, so I can't help you. So she told me out front that she is adopted and that she knows nothing of her biological family. So her name is Stephanie Stewart. She told me that she was born September 25th, 1958, in the Boston area. And she also noted, which I could see for myself, that she shares 536 centimorgans with Brian Wiggins. And is that important? Yes, because Brian Wiggins is my father. So if you share that much with Brian Wiggins, that means you're very closely related to me as well. She also noted, which this I had not seen until she pointed it out to me, that she shares 8 centimorgans with Vanessa Jenkins. That is my mother. So already I'm very intrigued that she matched both of my parents, especially because I was always, I had a little inkling in my head that maybe my parents were related, which is not true. I was able to prove that they're not related at all, but both of their fathers are from the same town in Georgia. So I always kind of had a thing like, I wonder if they're related or something, or people could be related to both of them because of that ancestral homeland called Americus, Georgia. But anyway, that's not relevant to what we're talking about right now. So I'm going to keep going through this list. She shared with me once we spoke on the phone that she had matches with that surname, which is French. I don't know how to pronounce it. It might be Benoit or something like that, but we'll just say Benoit for now. And she also has shared matches with Vanessa, my mother, on the champion line. So shared matches means, and this is probably the best thing on Ancestry, is that you don't only see your match, but you see who they match as well if you have that person in common. So basically you can see who matches, amongst 3 matches, which is called triangulation. And that was very important because I already had, especially on my mother's side, a very built out tree. And especially on the champions line, which is a line that I've been researching for many years, I was able to see very quickly that Vanessa and Stephanie matched on the champion side of my family. And Stephanie also shared with me on the phone that she had matches from Cabo Verde, which some of you may not know, but that's a very tiny place, but there's a lot of people from there. And it was Portuguese. It was a Portuguese, colony basically, but it's also on the coast of West Africa. So there's a mix there of Black people who speak Portuguese and who have Portuguese ancestry as well. But a lot of them are also Black. So that alone was like, oh, that was actually all the information I needed for several reasons. That surname Benoit or Benoit or Benoit, whatever it is, I don't know how to say it, but I do know it. I know it because my grandfather married a woman with that last name. That was his first wife. And she was a French Canadian woman, which still blows my mind that my grandfather, who was as dark as I am, was able to marry a white woman with Canadian ancestry in the early 1940s. And they only had one child together in 1941. So with that alone, for Stephanie to be matching my father and for her to have trees in her matches, what she noticed herself, that surname, there's really only one option, that she has to descend from my dad's half brother, who is the product of a Wiggins and Benoit marriage. So that made sense. My dad's brother was born in 41, so he was about 17 when he became a father. We don't know if he ever knew this, that he became a father, but 17 is certainly old enough to become a father. So that was figured out pretty quickly. And then as far as my mother's side, that was also figured out very quickly because, again, I knew about the champion line. and I was able to get access to Stephanie's matches, which is another great thing about Ancestry. You can let other people review your matches. So once I looked at her matches and could see that she matches champions very close. I mean, they were over 200 centimorgans, much closer than I am to the champions. And also knowing that one of my champion cousins married a man from where? Cape Verde. Well, that made that pretty easy to figure out as well. That particular cousin, her name was Emma. No, her mother's name was Annie. Annie was the one that married the man from Cape Verde, and their daughter's name was Emma. And so, of course, Stephanie has to come down from Emma. And Emma only had one daughter old enough to have given birth in 1958. So with just the information that you see on your screen, and of course me confirming that, going through her matches, using the shared centimorgan tool to make sure that my hypotheses fit with the data available, I was able to build a tree for Stephanie. Within 30 minutes, I was able to call Stephanie back and tell her who both of her parents were. Her mother and my mother were cousins, and her father and my father were brothers. So again, that's a very unique example, but I'm grateful for it because it doesn't get any better than that. And you can see there's various countries represented here. I mean, maybe you can't see, but Ben Santos from Cape Verde, Annie Champion from Georgia. You see the French Canadian side, the Benoit side, and then you see my great grandparents, George and Julia Wiggins, who are from Georgia, all mixed up to make my beautiful cousin Stephanie. And I was also able to get her pictures of her siblings, who unfortunately most of them passed away, but there was one still alive, and they got to meet, and just a really beautiful experience to share family with a new person. So I'm dedicating this presentation to Stephanie. We got to meet, of course, pretty much a month after I figured out who her parents were. And then unfortunately, Stephanie also has passed away since. She was in an accident actually 3 years exactly after she sent that message to me asking for assistance. So dedicating this to Stephanie and all the other adoptees. Please have hope. Even if you're not adopted, but you have questions about your biological heritage, have some hope. There is hope for everybody. Stephanie was in her 60s when she figured this out. So there's hope for everybody, no matter how old you are. So thank you, everybody. Please go to my website to contact me, oricejenkins.com. Feel free to send me a message, any questions, and I'll answer any of your questions here as well. Thank you.
Wow, that was just phenomenal. I mean, the personal story was just I just can't say enough. I mean, that just had me glued to the tube, or so, it is always so nice when people tell their stories and you are sharing information that can help families and others tell their stories. And that is what is so important about all of the genealogy work that we're looking at over this month. It's an opportunity to create the story, validate the story, and tell the story. And so I really appreciate it. People in the chat are saying thank you. Some are saying sorry for your loss. Just an excellent presentation. So job well done. Well, I mean, we really appreciate it, here in the studio and in the audience out there. So we have quite a few questions. So Dr. Clark, I'll let you start with a question and then I'll follow.
Okay. Well, thank you, Orice. I have no words. I'm just touched. Even though I knew this story, it touches me differently every time. So thank you so much for sharing. The first question is from Christina. And she has a question about a situation, especially if someone wasn't formally adopted. Her grandmother's mom abandoned her to people nearby. They informed the mom they were moving to a different state. The mom never came back to get my grandma, so they took her with them. Where would Christina start to find some details? And this is in Michigan.
Oh,
Well,
great.
Christina's from Michigan.
Right. Hi, Christina. So same process I went through in this presentation. DNA has nothing to do with how the person was adopted. Okay. So it might be a little harder if it's a generation, your grandma's mom. So you're looking for your great grandparent. So that's a little bit more distant and that makes it harder, but you can still figure it out, especially if, and I don't know if this is on your mom's side or your dad's side, but whoever your parent is, if they're still alive, get them tested. Even if they're not alive, but they have a sibling alive. If you have an aunt or an uncle on this side, get them tested. And that'll make it much easier, twice as easier, in fact, to figure out where your family came from. And that's because we lose half, you get cut in half. DNA gets cut in half every generation. So DNA will be able to help you no matter what. If you follow the same steps I took in this presentation, but you won't be able to get, the non-identifying information or something like that. But that's what happened to me. My grandma was basically adopted, and it took me years to figure out who her parents were. But I was able to do it, and DNA was really instrumental in that.
Great, great. We have another question from Sylvia. She wants to know how to research her family who were born in Canada.
It's a great question. So for Canadian records, you do need the World subscription, the World Explorer subscription on Ancestry, and I suggest getting it. Even though Canada is right over the river, if you happen to be in Detroit or wherever you are, it's not that far. But Canada is a different country, and so those records will be hidden with a regular subscription on Ancestry. But if you get that, there are so many records in Canada that are great. And they have different records than American records, different censuses, different birth records. So please, and also Family Search. Family Search is totally free, and they have Canadian records as well. There's also something called the Family Search Wiki, WIKI, and that will give you what's available in basically any area you're researching. So use that as well.
I'm going to take this opportunity to tag on another question that's somewhat similar. We have a question from Lauren. She says, I am half Japanese and wonder if there's a particular DNA test company that has in-depth information on the Asian and Asian American ancestors.
That's a great question, and I wish I was better prepared to answer it. There are companies that specialize in very specific countries. For example, if you're Jewish, you might want to test with MyHeritage. European in general, MyHeritage is a better test in many cases. Ancestry has a lot of Asian samples for their DNA. But I would Google that and get some advice from somebody that actually is Asian. I'm not sure. I'm trying to think if I know of any companies that specifically are Asian, and none come to mind right now. But I know Ancestry does have a lot of samples for Japanese. Deeper database, I'm not sure about. But thank you for that question.
So Cassandra asks, she has two questions. Does DNA information become available outside of the agencies? For instance, for medical companies, insurance companies, law enforcement? And how can DNA information be protected?
Very, very important questions. And I do realize that's the number one reason why a lot of people have not tested. And so I'll answer this as quickly as I can. As far as the information being available to outside agencies, that depends on the company. Each company has their own set of rules, regulations, terms, and conditions. Okay. You must read through that if that is a concern for you. So I will say that there are companies that absolutely do make information available, to medical companies, insurance companies, and law enforcement. That does happen. I do want to put in a plug for Ancestry because privacy is an utmost concern for Ancestry, to the point where there's certain things that I wish they would do, make available to us as researchers, that they won't because they're so concerned with privacy. So Ancestry is your best bet if you're concerned about that. The other companies, especially those that don't have a genealogy focus, like they might be more about health and DNA, selling to medical companies is definitely a concern. And then law enforcement, some companies will allow you to opt out of that. Like GEDmatch, that's been a big issue because they caught the was it the Golden State Killer with GEDmatch, and that became a big privacy concern. So they're not supposed to be doing that, but they still do it. So you want to, you have rights though. You can protect your DNA information by opting out of that on certain sites. You can also, you don't have to put your name on a DNA test. You could put Dr. Seuss is your name, and you don't have to make your tree public. That's very helpful to other people, but you can have a private tree that is unsearchable, and you can have a fake name if you're concerned about that, but still want answers. There are ways to protect yourself.
Okay. We have another question from Vernita. Does Ancestry have info on Africa and Native American descendants?
Well, the answer is yes. I don't know specifically what that person might mean, but yes, there's information on Ancestry about Africa, not a whole lot. And if you're referring to DNA matches, yes, you may see DNA matches direct that live in Africa. Now, for Native American, there are records on Ancestry that pertain to the Native American communities. DNA matches, not so much. So I'm not sure whether they're asking about records or DNA, but the answer is yes for both in a way.
All right. You just have to do their homework.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Dr. Clark?
Yes, Orice, I put this question in because I know that I've asked this of you before. If a biological relative is located and they don't want to respond or they don't want any contact, how do you advise those who you're working with as the adoptee?
Yeah. Well, like I said, well, you mean like their parent or you mean like a cousin?
Parent, cousin. Have you had that situation occur where the person that's been identified as a biological relative has indicated they want no contact?
Most of the people that I'm dealing with, their parents are deceased, and their cousins aren't really close to the situation, so they don't really care necessarily. So I haven't really dealt with this specific situation, and I have someone who thinks they're dealing with this situation. I have a cousin who thinks that her mother does not want any contact with her biological mother, but I don't think that's true. So there's a lot of psychological things that kind of go through your mind when you're dealing with this type of issue that need to be dealt with. And sometimes I end up getting into those, conversations, like almost like I'm a therapist as well. And I've, been on the phone for hours and hours with people that are adopted, and I can really, I'm really empathetic, towards them, because it is always a concern that what if they didn't want me in the first place? What if they don't want me now? What if they don't want to know me? But usually, almost every instance, I've found plenty of relatives that would love to know that person. So even if it's not a sibling or a parent or whatever, there's always going to be somebody. And Mary, you and I know this. We have found cousins that don't know us from a can of paint, that have embraced us and just been so willing to meet us and learn from us, and we get to learn from them as well. So I just say always still attempt to reach out. And if they don't want any contact, that's their loss.
Great. We have a question from Marge. She says she knows the name of her biological father, but cannot find his name on Ancestry. Is there a best way to find someone using a name and state where she believes they live?
Yes, there are ways to find that person. Um, Now, as far as finding them on Ancestry, that's a little bit difficult if they were born after 1950, because we only have access to censuses up until the 1950 census right now. So depending on how old they are, um, if they were older than that, try to find them as a child on the census or a young person on the census. But otherwise, there aren't too many public records where you'll be able to find your biological father, unless they're much older. So there are certain states where you can get public records, like Ohio, Texas, um, Florida. You can get a lot of certain records, but otherwise, off of Ancestry, you have to use like a people search website to try to find that person. If that person is young and still alive, you can possibly find them on Facebook. That's another tool that I've used to find people. And if you know the state that he moved to, that he lives in, that's a big help. Especially if you know the town too. If he has a very common name, make sure to include the town and the state. And just be careful that whoever you find may not be your biological father. So just be careful about that too.
From Linda, what type of information is on the form of non-identifying information from Michigan and other states?
Thank you for asking that. I forgot to go into a little bit of detail about that. Basically, it'll say your birth mother was 16 when you were born, and she came from a family of 12 children. And her mother was a seamstress, and her father was in the military. And her parents got divorced, and then the mother married another man and had 4 more children. It'll be very specific information, just no names. So all of that can really be used in genealogy. And what I just told you is almost word for word what I got in one of those files. And that was great. I mean, a woman that had 12 kids by one man, then she got remarried and had 4 other kids, and they're related to me. I was able to figure that out just from the non-identifying information alone. So definitely get that information. And they might even say, like, that same one says that the birth father was from a Pacific state, which we don't know if that's California, Oregon, Washington, but at least we know West Coast. It'll narrow things down for you when you're searching in your family trees. And then you can also give that information to your cousins that you're matching and see if that rings any bells to them.
Mm-hmm. Well, this has been wonderful. The information is in depth. We have one question that I'd like for you to address, a final question here. Given that this can be a lot of work and time consuming, do you have any suggestions for what a person should look for if they choose to hire someone else to do the work for them?
That's a great question. From our dear friend, Dr. Shelley, who presented the first week. I think that's a very difficult question to answer, honestly. You have to hire somebody that will be dedicated to what you're working on, because like Brenda just said, it does take time, and it also takes attention to detail. So for some reason, like Stephanie as an example, Stephanie was a great genealogist, my cousin who passed away. She had her whole adopted family's genealogy. I mean, she had everybody in her tree. And yet she couldn't see in her own DNA matches the clues that told me in 30 minutes who her parents were.
Mm.
It's the attention to detail that she was missing as far as those very specific clues that, they don't jump out at you unless you already know what you're looking for. So find somebody that has a really great attention to detail, especially as it relates to Black American families, which are just a whole different ball game compared to other cultures. Um, so that's my advice. Attention to detail is the most important thing.
Great. Well, I want to thank you, Oris, for this presentation. It has just been phenomenal. We've learned a lot. I Most of this was definitely all new to me, so it's been very interesting part of the series. And Dr. Clark, I want to thank you too for everything you've done and bringing all of these people to this platform. We are celebrating Black excellence at AARP with Black History Month, and these have all been stars. Dr. Shelley, who's on today, and Miss Bennett, have just been wonderful. And Oris, it's just been wonderful presentations. And next week, people, we want you to join us again Tuesday, same time, same place, 12 o'clock. If you register, you have a link to join. And next week, Dr. Clark is going to do a presentation. She is pulling together stories from ancestors to share with you, so that you can see just how some of those stories tell the contributions that your ancestors have made to their families and to the country. So we'll have some examples of that. And she's going to feature one about a World War II vet. I'm not going to tell you anymore. I want you to show up and see it. AARP is very invested in resources for veterans. So we know many of you are veterans, or your family members are veterans. And for those who are older, you might be supporting them in getting their veteran information, because it changes a lot. Benefits are always added. So you can go to aarp.org. We have a one-stop page for information for veterans also. So in the interim, between now and next week, check us out. Look and see what our resources are on a wealth of topics, particularly for caregivers. So join us next week. We look forward to having you. You should register if you haven't registered. If you have the link. You can click on the link that you used today to hear Mr. Jenkins' presentation again, because it was a lot of great information. We appreciate you. Please join us next week. And I want to say thank you again to our guest today and my co-host, Dr. Clark.
Thank you, Brenda. Thank you, Oris. Have a great day, everyone.
Bye.